And Mitchell were supposed to be here at this stage. But you know, COVID, he's stuck in Portugal, which is probably a nice place to be stuck. But yeah, I would rather have him here, to be honest. But Mitchell has been super like a sport because he's joining us by Zoom from Portugal live to talk about how they can like provide this experience across brands and borders. So a warm welcome to Mitchell, who will appear at the screen.
Hello, hello. Um, is there a way to tell if this thing is on or working? um, I guess I will go forward as if it is, and if it doesn't, then somebody will let me know. Thank you for the intro, Knut. And yes, as Knut said, my name is Mitch, and today we are going to be talking about engineering a structured content experience across brands and borders. Before I dive into it, I just want to say a quick thank you to Sanity for organizing this event and for gathering us all together. I wish I could be there with you in person. Unfortunately, COVID had some different plans. But regardless, I'm still very excited to be speaking with all of you today and to share the content that I've put together for you. So with that, the question that we're going to be looking at today is how can we enable our content teams who are working across brands, platforms, and regions to easily manage and deploy their own content? To give just a little bit of context on my perspective and the lens that we'll be looking through to answer our question, I'm a full stack engineer with Restaurant Brands International. I've been with them for almost 4 years now, currently working on their internal tools team, building out custom CMS features. So I get to work a lot with our implementation of Sanity. Restaurant Brands International, as Knut mentioned, is the parent company for the Burger King, Tim Hortons, Popeyes, and more recently, Firehouse Subs brands. Collectively, those brands operate about 29,000 restaurants in over 100 countries around the world. And our internal applications serve about 20 million monthly active users. So working with quite a bit of scale. So with that context, I want to take us back to a time 4 years ago when Restaurant Brands International did not use structured content. And they were faced with the same question: how can we enable our content teams to own their data? At the time, if you were on one of our content teams and you wanted to make an update, you typically would fill out an Excel sheet, send it to one of the agencies that we worked with. They would send it to one of their sub agencies, who would in turn publish the content. And that whole process took about 3 days end to end. So we didn't have a very tight visual feedback loop. And as a result, oftentimes our content didn't look, feel, or behave the way we anticipated. And our content teams ultimately lost trust in the process and became more hesitant to publish new, fresh content. Ultimately, this led to our application content becoming stale and outdated. So our leadership identified this as being an issue for us and set out a handful of goals for our team to empower our content teams to own their data. As you can see, we wanted to be able to deploy new content in under 3 minutes. We wanted to build everything under one platform that would serve 12 shared applications. And we wanted to do all of this, as Knut said, within a year. And at the time, our team was only about 15 people between product and engineering. So very lean team, and we wanted to get the maximum efficiency from our team. So we wanted to share as much logic as we feasibly could. So with those goals, our team had a clear understanding of when and where we needed to end up, but we needed to figure out everything leading up to that point. And the first thing that we did before building anything is we identified what are the key needs of a shared structured content platform experience. What are the things that we absolutely need to execute on in order to achieve our goals? And not only from an engineering, product, and design perspective, but also from the perspective of the content teams who would be interacting with these systems. So we came up with this list of 4 needs. We needed to build a platform that was trustworthy, rigid, and flexible. I know those are opposites, but we'll get a little bit more into it. We needed a platform that was interoperable and finally scalable. So the next logical question here is, what do these really mean? What is their desired outcome? And how do we build them into our platform? So we'll go one at a time. A trustworthy platform is one that produces content that consistently looks, feels, and behaves the way we expect it to. And the end goal here is we want to enable our content teams to produce quality content frequently, ultimately giving our end users and the applications a more engaged experience. If I'm updating content, I don't want to have to guess what it will look like or how it will behave when I deploy it to production. I want to be confident in the updates that I'm making, and a good platform will tell me if I update X, then the application should reflect those changes with Y, and it should do so quickly and consistently. So how do we go about building trust into our platform? Well, we found that the most effective way is to leverage in-place validations that give our content team members instant feedback on the structured content that they're updating. Here you can see on this slide, we're updating a little bit of content here, and we have a clear indicator in our UI that something is wrong. We also have a clear indicator for what particularly is wrong, and we also include a description of how this particular chunk of data impacts the front end. And there are two main things that I want to highlight here that validations are doing for us. One, they act as bumpers to prevent bad data from reaching our front end. Our front end has very strict requirements for the various shapes of data it can receive. So if we can enforce the shapes of the data on the content side, we can have confidence that the relationship between our content management system and our front end platform will be satisfied. And we can mitigate bugs due to misconfigured content data. The second way that validations are helping us here is they actually serve as a form of documentation for our content teams. Instead of saying, this is wrong, fix it, validations can say, this is wrong because of X. To remediate, please change to Y. In other words, validations give us the ability to provide actionable feedback to our content teams. And as a result of the documentation essentially being built into the platform, we can set expectations for what will happen in the front end, and we can reduce the need for engineering and product resources who might otherwise be called on to explain the relationships between our content and front end platforms. To give you an idea of how deep we can go with validations, here's an example of an external validation check that we put on our offers. This validation allows us to reach out to a separate service, gather information on how many restaurants the particular offer is available at, and then ultimately display that information to the content team member in a way that is actionable for them. I wanted to show you this because it is these types of validations that allow us at Restaurant Brands International to house extremely complex data, such as our menu data, as Knut mentioned, which has multiple dependencies beyond just matching what the front end expects. So how do validations tie back to our goal of building a trustworthy platform? They allow our content teams to be confident that the data that they're pushing to our end users is clean, and they give our content teams a more thorough understanding of the data that they're managing. So we've talked a little bit about trustworthiness. Now we're just going to go a little bit into rigidity and flexibility. A platform that is both rigid and flexible strikes a balance between shared core features and custom functionality. The end goal here is we want to maintain an overall intuitive structure in our platform while also allowing full customization for each of our market's unique needs. Now, the first piece I want to talk about here is rigidity. This is arguably one of the most important aspects of the platform that you need to get right in order for your teams to have an enjoyable experience with it. One of the beautiful things about working with Sanity is that we have the freedom to structure our content however we want. And this is a really powerful concept, but to get the most benefit from it, we need to incorporate some standards and best practices. So how do we go about building rigidity into our structured content platform? To answer this question, we can actually look where this content will be consumed and attempt to match the hierarchical structure. For the most part, at least at Restaurant Brands International, this data is ultimately going to be surfaced on our application's front end. So the question becomes, how do we organize our front end? At a high level, we organize by unique pages and reusable components. And we see this structure or slight variations of it in many modern projects. So that is the high-level structure that we adopted for our content platform. If we build a one-to-one mapping of our content and front end, then in learning how to navigate one system, we learn both. And this makes it significantly easier for teams that are working across platforms to communicate with each other. There's one little exception here, which is for parts of your application that don't change from page to page. for example, maybe something like a footer component or a navigation panel. It is for this reason that RBI calls their top level structures features instead of pages. So at this point, we have a project structure for our content, but we can also design our content editing experience to match our front end flows. For example, if we have a multi-step flow in our front end, like navigating a menu, we can replicate that flow in our content editing platform to foster an intuitive experience. And we'll show an example of this in the consecutive slides. The final thing I want to touch on for rigidity, and probably one of the more critical pieces here, is building out reusable blocks of data. The idea here is that we want to create widgets, which are smaller data objects that map one-to-one with our components on our front end. So as long as we build our front ends to be flexible enough to receive these different data objects, we can construct a page with a great degree of flexibility while maintaining a close relationship between components and data objects. So here we're just going to go through a couple of examples to illustrate these ideas. Above, we can see how our menu content flow closely maps to what we see in the front end of our applications. We see a set of sections, whether we're looking in our application or our content platform. And if we click one, I don't know if it transitioned. There we go. If we click one, our content platform and our front end both take us to a similar view with similar options for the next group of items in the hierarchy. And this traverses all the way down the menu. So again, the idea here is if we know how to navigate one platform, I know how to navigate the other, and the experience between the two is seamless. Here, we have some examples of leveraging reusable components. As you can see, these are different variations of our homepage across a few of our brands and markets. And as you can see, a few building blocks and some branded content goes a long way to give a unique feel for our different markets. And this is actually a good segue into building flexibility into our applications. So our markets are inherently unique. Whether we're looking at differences between regions or differences between brands, we needed a way to be able to serve them each uniquely. And one of the big challenges that we faced initially was that custom work for one market often added additional noise for other markets. Noise in this case being defined as data objects that don't actually do anything or are not relevant for a particular brand. One example is roll up the rim. This is a big campaign for us that drives a lot of business for our Tim Hortons Canada market, but it is not applicable for our Burger King US market. And if we look at the image on the slide, you can see that we're hiding the promotions folder for markets that do not require custom promotions. This may seem like a small deal, but when you're scaling to potentially hundreds of markets, these nuances can create a lot of noise and confusion for your content teams. So it's just important that you stay on top of them. Similarly to reducing the noise in our folder structure, we can also reduce the noise in the smaller data chunks themselves. Here we have two views, Burger King on the left and Tim Hortons on the right. All you really need to know about this data chunk is that it holds references to different menus. And as you can see, we're hiding the Google Food ordering option for our Tim Hortons market since they don't have that. And again, the benefit here is we reduce complexity and confusion for our content teams. They only see what they only need to see. So we've touched a little bit on trustworthiness and rigidity and flexibility. Now we're going to shift a little bit and talk about interoperability. It's really just a fancy word for saying our platform needs to be able to interact with multiple external data sources. The end goal here is we need to be able to pull in our menu, restaurant, and point of sale data into one queryable medium. RBI has a unique challenge in that we have multiple types of data and multiple sources of truth for those data types. We have point of sale data, which houses information on pricing and availability. We have our restaurant data, which holds things like operating hours, location addresses, whether or not the restaurant's open. And we have our menu data, which has all of our items and underlying information like nutrition. Now, these external sources of truth didn't have any queryable APIs. So we needed a platform that would be able to communicate with these external data sources and pipe their data into a queryable medium, in this case, Sanity. Fortunately, with the help of the Sanity JavaScript client, we're able to effectively build tools that populate our content management system with the desired external data on a regular cadence. And this ensures that our content is fresh and up to date. Now, I don't want to drift too far off topic, but it is worth mentioning that piping in this type of data is not super common practice for a structured content platform. And we're definitely testing the current limits of the types of complex data that can be used in a structured content platform. That said, we're doing it today and it's possible. Next slide. So now we're moving on to the final piece, which is scalability. And a scalable platform is able to be quickly provisioned and quickly brought up to speed with a limited number of resources. The end goal here is we want to be able to spin up new markets for our brands and allow them to start making content edits within a matter of days. So how do we build scalability into our content platform? At a high level, all we really need to do is identify the steps in the process to launch a new market, find the stress points, and if necessary, build out some tooling to relax these stress points. So if we look at these steps for Restaurant Brands International, the first thing we do is we provision a new instance for our content platform. We create a new data set. And we can do so with either a couple of clicks or a command line shortcut, thanks to Sanity's tooling. And the next step, once we have our new data set, is to transfer over any content from other markets that we may be able to reuse. This typically includes things like a contact us page or about the company page or footer configurations, things like that. To do this, we leverage the same JavaScript client that we mentioned in the interoperability section to port specific pieces of content between different markets' data sets. One minor challenge that we found here is that just copying over an entire data set sometimes created a little bit of confusion. For example, if we're copying the entire Tim Hortons Canada data set into US, now we have a bunch of Canadian restaurants in our US data set. So after doing this a few times, we realized that we needed to be a bit more selective and built out some tools to do this selectively and efficiently. And now we can do so in under an hour. Next, we have translations. Assuming we had them off the bat, we could update them in under an hour, but we typically rely on third parties to provide professional translations for us. So that process usually takes about a week. And finally, we have our custom content section. And this piece takes the longest time as we're not only updating content in this step, this is where markets are determining what they want the look and feel of their platform to be. They're experimenting with different layouts and then finally building out their market-specific structured content to give their platform its unique look and feel. So we've talked a little bit about how we spin up new markets and some of the places we built tooling to enhance our scalability, but there are some additional benefits that can be leveraged when we're spinning up a data set that's using the same underlying structured content schema and platform for all of our markets. Namely, one, we can leverage people from other markets to assist with the setup, since they already know how the platform works, as it's the same in their market and it's interacting with the same front end. Second, any documentation that we already have is applicable across all of our markets, so we don't need to spend time and resources reinventing the wheel. Third, the process of updating content is non-blocking. So while our other teams work out the logistics of launching a new market, such as legal implications, our content teams can get to work right away so that they're ready when the rest of the application is ready to be shipped. Now, there's one final piece of scalability that I want to talk about, which is really important, and it's mass updates. And the best way to describe it is to walk through a scenario that we experienced. So around the same time that we first began building out our platform and content, accessibility was becoming more and more of a theme in web development, and we wanted to incorporate accessible features. From a content perspective, that meant adding a bunch of alternative text to thousands of images across our data sets. Now, in a non-structured content world, this would likely be a manual process and take a lot of time and effort. But since we are in a structured content world, we were able to treat our content as data, and we were able to dynamically update thousands of content blobs in just a matter of minutes. So just a couple of key takeaways, just to rehash the different needs that we went through. When we're building a structured content platform across brands and borders, if we want to build in trustworthiness into our application, we should build out validations to inspire confidence in our content teams. If we want to build in rigidity and flexibility, we want to create standards early on, stick to them, and make our structured content as modular and reusable as we possibly can. Finally, for interoperability, if you need to port in external data, make sure your platform has an easy way of doing so and develop processes around that for updating your data to ensure that it's fresh. And then finally, if you want to build scalability into your platform, first define what scaling your content platform will look like, identify bottlenecks in the process, and then build some tooling around your pain points to ease those constraints. And with that, that's everything I've got for you guys. Thank you so much for your time. And I think we have a little bit more time if any of you have questions.
Right. Thank you, Mitch. Like, I don't think you can see us. I'm not sure if you can hear all the applause that just happened, but there was a lot of applause happen. Thank you so much for sharing all of these insights and advice with us. You have been at RBI for kind of like this whole process. Like, obligatory question: what is the thing you wish you knew 4 years ago? What is the hard-learned lesson?
It's a good one. Honestly, I think probably the biggest thing that we've done more recently, and I touched on it a little bit with the rigidity and flexibility, was organizing the structure of our content platform. So, and I guess there was two pieces of that. One was making sure that our folders are consistent and kind of mapped to our front end. The other is making sure that we're only showing our content teams in specific markets the content that they need to be seeing. We don't want to give them a bunch of extra fluff. When we first launched, we were putting pretty much all of our data into one document called app data. So obviously our queries just became huge, and as our content grew and grew, it just became unmanageable.
I love that you give so much thought to the editorial experience and like making sure that the content team can be successful. And we at Sanity have learned a lot by you kind of like really trying out the platform. So we appreciate that. Right, thank you so much for zooming in.
Absolutely, thank you for having me.
And have a great evening.